Satanic ritual? Are too many Satanists rejecting its formal practice based on misconceptions? Is it as daunting of a task as some newcomers to Satanism perceive it to be? The choice to ritualize and Satanic Altar Tools 101, today on Satansplain.
Well, it's not Satan worship, it's Satanism. It's embracing the life-enriching things which have traditionally been given the devil's name. Pride, lust, earthly success, rational self-interest, atheism, humor, nonconformity, science, a passion for living, being selective about whom we love. We don't see these as shameful sins, but empowering ideals. And we also recognize the psychological power and fun of symbolism and aesthetics, so we utilize Satan as mythology's most fitting mascot for what we're about.
Satansplain, Satanic Talk with Church of Satan Magister Bill M.
Welcome to Satansplain. I am Magister Bill M. Halloween is fast approaching. Many Satanists choose to perform satanic rituals on Halloween night. I myself have done some form of formalized ritual each and every Halloween night since 1989, and 2022 will be no exception. I talked a little bit about ritual in the previous episode of Satansplain, and here and there in some other episodes, but for this episode, I would like to talk about the topic by sharing two particular essays I wrote back around 2006. And these were for a short-lived publication from Dark Moon Press. The publication was called The Ninth Gate. I wrote articles for the first two issues, which they printed. Obviously, those issues are long out of print, so I would like to share each of them with you. Before we get started, I have one announcement. I am going to be a guest on Coast to Coast AM, a nationally syndicated radio show. It used to be the Art Bell show when Art Bell was still alive. But Coast to Coast AM is a radio show about the bizarre and paranormal and the like. The show has been around for decades in some form or another. We have had some Church of Satan representatives on the show in previous years. Reverend Andre Schlesinger, a Church of Satan member from New York and a grotto master back when we had the grotto system, he was on. Blanche Barton, I believe, was also on the show. And in any case, next it will be me on Monday, October 24th. You should be able to find a link to that on Satansplain.com, one of the blog entries there. Hopefully it goes well. Oh, and if by chance there are some annoying atheist neckbeard nerd types seeing this news and thinking, dude, this means the Church of Satan believes in the supernatural. They're going on a show where they talk about aliens and ghosts and conspiracy theories and the Church of Satan are not real atheists. Okay, first of all, shut up. Second of all, I've already talked about the satanic take to esotericism in Satansplain episode number 14, and probably some other episodes too. And third, Satanism is indeed something that's mysterious to people in that they've heard a lot of lore and legends about, and the Church of Satan has been setting the record straight for people who want to know. So yeah, I'm going to be on this radio show, so there. So with that out of the way, let's not waste any more time and get right to the essay on the choice not to ritualize, and I had put the word not in parentheses. Published in 2006 in issue number 1 of The Ninth Gate, Dark Moon Press. One common accusation we hear from clueless Satanism bashers is that Satanists are merely people who hate Christianity. Of course, as anybody who's bothered to do even a minimal amount of research on Satanism knows, Satanism is not merely inverted Christianity. Even a simple read through the Satanic Statements, the 9 Sins, or the 11 Satanic Rules of the Earth shows that the tenets of Satanism do not require much, if any, knowledge of Christianity's dogma. Nonetheless, Satanism occasionally attracts some newcomers who are fixated with the religion's esoteric and blasphemous aspects, while overlooking the philosophy and how it applies to life's everyday secular situations. Anton LaVey described this behavior as Phase 1 Satanism. Now, if I could break from the essay for a moment, on a side note, I have been asked by some Satanists if that sort of focus on the blasphemy and the devilish aesthetics is Phase 1. Are there additional phases that Satanists are supposed to step through? Is there a specific Phase 2, 3, and so on? And my answer to that is to point out that phase 1 in this context more so refers to the phases of the Church of Satan itself. And these have been written about before. You can find references in a couple of different essays. The phases of emergence and then development. Then the next was called qualification and then control and so on. As the Church of Satan continued as an organization, learning what works for us and what doesn't work. And so coming out in the beginning by telling the world, we're here, we're symbolically with the devil, we're not going away. Well, that was necessary and fun and all, but eventually we had to take that to the next level. And anyway, this is beyond the scope of the essay, but that's more about the phrase, the expression, first phase. Let us get back to the essay. A person who grew up under forced religious indoctrination, for example, may find Satanism to be attractive and liberating with its sacrilegious symbolism and rituals. But it should go without saying that the one who tries to memorize all of the Enochian keys, or strives to get the biggest inverted cross jewelry they can find, yet can't make anything of his or her life outside of the ritual chamber, well, that's somebody who still doesn't get Satanism. Granted, though, some of them do find the catharsis they needed, which enables them to move on from the Phase 1 attitude to the more serious, self-defining aspects of Satanism. Now, having said all of that, many Satanists I know are quick to identify and criticize these sorts of people, these sort of all ritual and no philosophy newbie types. But I do have to say this. A much more common problem I see are the people who take the exact opposite view. And by that, I mean the people who identify as Satanists and embrace the philosophy, but completely reject the entire concept of ritual. And these people, I would argue, are likewise people who on some level don't really get it. And as bad as both extremes may be, again, I have to say that it is this latter extreme that I see far more often. We are always saying that in order to truly understand Satanism, to understand what it's about, one must at the very least read the Satanic Bible. Yet, I cannot tell you how many times I've heard somebody say, well, I just finished reading the book and I strongly agree with the first half, but I don't understand all this ritual nonsense. Now, in all fairness, not every single Satanist understands it right off the bat either. Even Church of Satan High Priest Peter H. Gilmore admitted that upon his very, very first reading of the Satanic Bible at age 13, he initially did not fully understand the role of such fantasy-filled ritual in a rationally minded religion. I know that this trivia bit is probably difficult to believe for those of us who have had the privilege of seeing Magus Gilmore lead satanic ceremonies with his commanding charisma, but I digress. Unfortunately, it doesn't really help when people respond to the "I don't get the whole ritual" comment with, "Oh, that's okay. You don't need to do ritual in order to be a Satanist." Although technically true, it's all too easy for some to misinterpret this statement as, it's perfectly okay to call yourself a Satanist, but completely dismiss 2/3 of the pages of the Satanic Bible and all of the satanic rituals. In fact, given that many of these people who don't understand greater magic do not understand lesser magic either, you can probably add the Satanic Witch to that list of ignored works. And I know we are not religious fundamentalists, as we don't view these books as sacred and inerrant canon. But the point is that these works still comprise our main literature and invariably find themselves at the very top of any satanic reading list. And I'm very wary of anybody who claims to be an adherent of any particular religion, whether it's Satanism or something else, yet at the same time will reject the majority of that religion's literature and tenets. Or worse, will assure a newcomer that it's perfectly acceptable to do this. Now, is organized ritual a strict requirement for Satanists? Again, no. Unlike religions made for the masses, Satanists do not drag themselves to face an altar every week for services. I mean, if you take a look at the Christian churches, most people who pack those churches every Sunday are not driven by piousness, not driven by a devotion to the religion, but rather attend out of guilty feelings of obligation, habit, the need for a good guy badge, or simply fear of otherwise being ostracized by their community or family members. As those who have read the Satanic Bible already know, desire is the first ingredient of a satanic ritual, and if the desire to ritualize isn't there, then don't. Still, there is a big difference between refraining from forced ritual and dismissing ritual altogether. So why do we have rituals and symbols at all? Several reasons are given in the Satanic Bible. To summarize one of these, humans have an inherent need for, quote, ceremony and ritual, fantasy and enchantment. Of course, psychology, logic, and the scientific method are wonderful tools that we use to explain most of what we see in the world. But the one thing they don't do is fulfill the basic human desire for escape, general awe, learning to accept things emotionally as opposed to just intellectually, nor do they fulfill that need for fantastical ritualistic expression. Now, formalized ritual where things are set up and organized to follow an essentially pre-planned ceremony, is of course not the only way of experiencing these things. Most people get their emotionalized ceremonial kicks through other means without even knowing it, maybe. Whether that's fulfilled in going to baseball games and devoting oneself to a particular team, or joining a fraternal order, dressing up for and attending rock concerts, delving into conspiracy theories, exploring the mysteries of complex mathematics or quantum physics, or other means that generate a somewhat premeditated and especially charged emotional response. Regardless, the deep-seated needs for ceremony and ritual, fantasy and enchantment do exist. As I've said in the past, I find it to be no coincidence that a disproportionate number of atheists appear to be science fiction fanatics. Likewise, many Satanists find that they ritualize their emotions through their inventive projects. They may find a release through painting, or composing music, putting together their own radio show, or some other creative process. Unfortunately, the most common reasons I hear for rejecting formalized ritual are rather just convenient excuses. A common one I hear is, well, I'm a very rational and skeptical person, so I'd feel really silly standing there in front of an altar and calling forth all these gods and stuff. Ironically, there is in fact no rational reason to feel embarrassment when performing a solitary ritual in a room all by yourself. In truth, I would say what this person fears is suspension of disbelief, or at the very least, they just don't know how to let go. As stated in the 9 Satanic Sins, the only time self-deceit should be entered into is when it's fun and with awareness, but then it's not really self-deceit. This is what the intellectual decompression chamber is all about, objectively entering the subjective state and making that work for you. Trying to pride oneself in being too intelligent for such practices is a bogus excuse. If anything, it is the typical analytical or businessman types who I see performing formalized rituals more often. These are people who, by their very nature, already do a lot of logical, critical thinking throughout the day. Additionally, they may live and work in environments that aren't suited for heavily personal aesthetics or nonconformity. And for these reasons, they may feel the desire to visit the ritual chamber more often than, say, more of the more artsy types of Satanists. Occasionally, I'll also hear people who say things like, well, I don't need ritual. If I'm mad at an enemy, I'll just play a violent video game for 6 hours. And again, there are certainly ways of releasing emotions without using formalized, organized ritual. But there is a clear difference between mindlessly hitting a faceless punching bag and performing a conjuration of destruction. Focus is the key here. Distractions like video games are ultimately just that, distractions. They can release tension and possibly get the thought of your problems out of your mind, but not in the same focused way that formalized ritual can do. To use the Conjuration of Destruction example again, this involves setting up a dedicated environment, digging up that very primal rage of hatred within you, and consciously focusing such thoughts on the vermin in question, destroying the scum by proxy, by perhaps mutilating an effigy with absolutely no regret and no other thoughts on your mind. That's not exactly the same thing as sitting on the couch and compulsively pressing buttons against fake nameless humans in a video game for hours until either boredom or bedtime arrives. Other people simply seem lazy. They'll say, well, I don't have anywhere to put an altar, or, well, I don't know where to buy a gong, so that's that. Altars do not have to be permanent displays, let alone decorated with all the tools listed in the Satanic Bible. In fact, a closer reading of the book reveals that there are indeed some corners that can be cut. And I will be talking all about that in the second essay I'll be reading in this episode, but let's continue with the first. For example, gongs are, quote, only required for group rituals, and any elevated plane can serve as an altar. With enough imaginative substitution, it's possible to essentially conduct the standard satanic ritual using only a candle and a hand-drawn sigil Baphomet hanging on the wall. What's important is that you find a time and place where you can be alone and uninterrupted, and set up an environment there where you have a central focal point, the altar or the Baphomet, plus the ability to temporarily disassociate your mind from the day-to-day world, thus allowing you to fully release your emotions. Having more tools simply helps to reinforce that overall environment and the symbolism of what you're doing at different points of your ritual. This brings up another common misconception that rituals are a time where anything goes. Some even say, oh, there's no wrong way to do a ritual. Actually, there are indeed wrong ways to ritualize. Some examples include not having a well-defined beginning or ending to the ceremony, or trying to ritualize while glancing at the TV every 3 minutes to check out the football scores, or making small talk and joking and rib jabs during a group ritual, and of course, doing something that goes directly against the principles of Satanism, such as worshiping some deity sincerely or sacrificing an animal. These examples either go against the whole idea of intellectual decompression, or, in the very last example, conflict with the role of the ego and what being a Satanist really means. Similarly, some do ritualize but throw away the existing literature with the argument of, well, it's all about creating your own environment. I shouldn't really be using any of these tools or guidelines in the book. I should be doing my own thing. Personal rituals are always more effective and anything goes. All right, first of all, while I do see the benefit in doing the occasional impromptu ritual or completely self-written ritual, especially when emotions are at their peak, sometimes you get a strike while the iron is hot, I still find that the ones who boast about these things the most are typically just too undisciplined or unorganized to set up something formal and carry it through. I know some people by their nature are more spontaneous, but this is not really a time to be scatterbrained. There's also the potential problem of completely impromptu rituals becoming directionless, prone to error from bad planning, and ultimately making the session ineffective. Did you remember to shut off your smartphone? That bootlegged music clip that you're grabbing from YouTube, are you sure that's long enough for what you're going to be doing? Will there be a car commercial suddenly playing at the end? You have a chalice with a drink on your altar. Okay, do you know when exactly, at what point in the ritual you're going to drink that? Because I've been in group rituals where the person conducting it just, forgot. Did you remember that the plumber is coming by at 3 o'clock today? So we can't expect a ritual necessarily to go 100% perfect, but it certainly doesn't hurt to think about these sorts of things. A little organization goes a long way. Another thing these people overlook is that even if you were to take the other extreme approach to ritual and follow the standard 13-step satanic ritual word for word from the book, as literally as possible, it still leaves so much open to personalization. For example, I have never seen two satanic altars that looked the same, even if they all had a gong, a sword, a bell, and so on. Also, you can still use whichever infernal names or Enochian keys you find most appropriate. And there is, in fact, a do what you need to do part right in the middle, namely at step number 10, which you are expected to customize. You'll notice, by the way, that this is the part that typically takes up the most amount of time during the course of the ceremony. The parts before and after are largely about defining a necessary beginning and end. In summary, while the Book of Lucifer of the Satanic Bible can be seen as the true meat of the book, it is hardly the only part. Satanism is not merely a philosophy, but a religion, a codified system of both real-life applicable principles as well as related ritual. Ritualistic expression is a beautiful and powerful tool, and those who are too quick to dismiss it are missing out. Reread the Book of Belial and give it a whirl. We're going to take a break right now. When we come back, Satanic Altar Tools 101. You are listening to Satansplain.
You are listening to Satansplain, real satanic talk with Church of Satan Magister Bill M. For questions, comments, and correspondence, send an email to bill@satansplain.com.
I don't think you believe it in the first place. You know what? All these people, every tragedy, not just this one, all the time, they cry on the news and they go, oh, it was terrible and it was tragic, but he's in a better place now. He's with Jesus and we have to... Then why are you crying? If he's in this utopia, this fucking paradise, why are you crying? He was in the best place he could ever be. You should be happy. Did you cry when you get a fucking job promotion and a new car too? It's terrible. It's terrible how happy he is for eternity. If you really believe death leads to eternal bliss, then why are you wearing a seatbelt? You get all fucking quiet you want. I can fucking edit laughter in. I'll edit a standing ovation right in there. I know people in the recording industry. I don't care.
That sacrilegious comedy hors d'oeuvre is from The Devil's Mischief. Listen to The Devil's Mischief on RadioFreeSatan.com.
Magister Bill M. here with Satansplain. Visit the official website for the show, Satansplain.com. You can listen to the show right there on the website, but of course you can also listen to Satansplain on Audible, Spotify, YouTube, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and other places as well. I had a problem with Stitcher recently. It was pointed out to me that Stitcher wasn't pulling the latest episodes. I guess they changed ownership sometime in the past year and revamped how things are done, so I've been trying to straighten that out. If you use a service like Stitcher to listen to Satansplain and you noticed there haven't been any episodes in a while, well, you can double check by going to Satansplain.com. Go to the website and check, because I do make a point of putting all of the episodes there on the site once they're available. So this is why I do that sort of thing. For questions or comments in general, you can, of course, email me. bill@satansplain.com is the email address. Speaking of podcasts, with Halloween season here, I'm going to be doing a 2022 Halloween special for my other podcast, The Devil's Mischief. I should get around to that soon. Go to RadioFreeSatan.com or DevilsMischief.com when that's available. As I record my voice right now, I still don't know what I'm going to be playing specifically. We'll see. And now, as promised, here's the second of the two essays, Satanic Altar Tools 101. I will likewise be interjecting some related thoughts along the way. Okay, here we go. Satanic Altar Tools 101. I opened this essay with a quote from Anton LaVey from the book Church of Satan, which of course has since been greatly expanded and re-released as the book We Are Satanists by Blanche Barton. So the quote from LaVey that I used was, "I wrote my books containing simple, accessible instructions with a minimum of equipment so people can get the feeling of performing greater magic and getting results." Anton LaVey. Anybody who thinks of the standard satanic ritual from the Satanic Bible as being too complicated or constricting has obviously never read too many occult books. Many of those occult volumes seem more concerned with the preparation of ritual rather than the actual event of ritualizing, making a scavenger hunt out of the whole thing. Gather 4 basil leaves under the 3rd full moon and bury them in the nearest crossroads after a bird flies by, and so on. Dr. LaVey studied countless frustrating books like these and finally simplified things down to what really works, under what conditions, and what is truly meant by works. Many occult practices present their ritual steps like links in a chain. Do one step wrong or leave one ingredient out, and the whole thing doesn't work. The practice of satanic magic and ceremony, however, is more like a rope. Cutting away one fiber of the rope doesn't render the whole rope useless. However, adding more and more fibers to the rope strengthens it. The rope, in this case, is your ritual chamber and the setup of your ceremony. Ritual tools, background music, the removal of distractions, and the words and motions of the ceremony all serve to reinforce the intellectual decompression environment you're trying to create. The better you can create a temporary environment for suspending counterproductive judgment and for properly channeling your thoughts, the more effective things will be. Now, an additional point I would like to make, which wasn't in the original essay but is relevant here. I know there are some people who will argue that it is entirely possible to do some type of satanic ritual without any physical altar tools. Some Satanists will, for example, point out a guided satanic meditation that was narrated and recorded by Church of Satan Magister Nemo, or that they can similarly do a ritual without owning black candles, owning a bell, or anything else. Well, I have 2 responses to this approach. One, where is the fun in that? I don't want the pre-recorded version. I want the works. Give me the black candles. Give me the black robes, the sword, the gong, the chalice. I want to do the real deal. Now, that's not a slam against Magister Nemo's recording, or to take away from the fact that having a meditation like that is still better than no ritual at all. But if you can do it with a real altar and the real tools, then why the hell not? So that's my first response to the people who are quick to say, oh, you don't need the altar tools. My second point here is that I would argue that the gathering of the tools is, in and of itself, a ritual of sorts. For one thing, there's the whole esoteric and fun journey of finding each of these tools one by one. You don't need to get them all at once, or hold off on doing your first ritual until you get each and every one first. I'll go into details about that later. But there's something to be said about having the drive and the patience to get these items for yourself. In fact, in this day and age where everybody just wants everything to be done online, who don't want to get up off the couch or off their phone to do something, even for themselves, when it seems fewer and fewer people even own a physical book collection, let alone a physical music collection or movie collection these days. So, with all this in mind, I think having a dedicated set of altar tools you can hold in your hand is perhaps all the more satanic. And also, think of the mentality of the alternative. Suppose there was a Satanist whose mentality was, I want to see my enemy dead more than anything, destroyed. I'm ready to take the very core carnal hatred I have from the bottom of my black metaphorical soul and focus that will to the point where I can practically feel my enemy die. I want him eradicated from this world more than anything. Not if I gotta find a candle first. That's like asking way too much. But no, I want him dead. It is my utmost desire. I want him eradicated so much that not if it means I got to clear off a table in my apartment, because, that's a lot of work. So hopefully I've made my point clear. If you don't have the drive or the discipline to get any of these sorts of tools, if you don't have the drive or discipline to find a place where you can clear off a table and be alone for 20 minutes, then how are you going to have the drive or discipline to do what you have to do in the ritual chamber? How strong can your desire possibly be if the act of buying a candle is going to be an obstacle. I've seen this sort of mentality even outside of Satanism. I've been on general witchcraft forums online where somebody will say, hey, where can I find some free spells? Now, as a Satanist, I obviously have my disagreements with witchcraft approaches that are, more on the woo side, the spiritual side, but that's not the point. Never mind that. If you're a Wiccan or a chaos magician or whatever, and you can't even muster the means to buy a cheap Llewellyn paperback book of spells, then what makes you think you can muster up whatever power you believe will happen when you do one of those spells? And again, as a Satanist, I don't believe there's some kind of supernatural thing going on here, but you got my point. There is a powerful psychological thing happening when you make the effort to get the altar tools. And as you'll see with the rest of this essay, getting the tools is not as daunting of a task as you may think. So continuing with the essay. There's no need to be hung up on making your first ritual perfect. In fact, there is no such thing as a perfect ritual. If we could create the exact environments we always wanted, then we probably wouldn't need ritual in the first place. You can, however, make minor substitutions and still have a ceremony that serves its purpose. How hard is it really to obtain the necessary tools listed in the Satanic Bible? Well, let's look at the actual list from the book. For the sake of simplicity, we'll assume that we're only concerned with a private or solitary ceremony as opposed to a group ceremony. Now let's go through each of the altar tools listed in the Satanic Bible. What's the first one? Clothing. Quote, female participants wear garments which are sexually suggestive. Men may substitute all black clothing for black robes. Okay, sounds easy to me. Going skyclad, going naked would seem like an option too. I mean, this is, after all, a session with formal recognition of the carnal. Then again, nobody will see what you're wearing if you're doing a solitary ceremony anyway, so it could be argued that it doesn't really matter. But this is why clothing, I would say, is more demanding for group ritual, because seeing fellow participants standing around in blue jeans and logo t-shirts could very well disrupt the mood, for the participants there in the ritual. Even then, a black t-shirt with a rock band logo can be turned inside out, making it, an efficient all-black shirt. Next item in the list, the altar. What does the book say? In private ceremonies, any elevated plane may be used. So, get a flat surface off the floor that you can put stuff on. How easier could this one be? Next item, symbol of Baphomet. I would call this personally the most important tool, as it serves as the real central focus point and reinforces why you're doing what you're doing. It shouldn't be that hard to draw your own sigil. And again, it's okay if you're not an artist. There's no need for perfection at this point. Or you could even photocopy and enlarge the one that's on the front cover of the Satanic Bible, or print one out from the internet. It doesn't have to be huge, but rather just big enough to see. So once you have that, tape it on the wall in front of you. Next item, candles. What does the Satanic Bible say? Only black and white candles are to be used. Never use more than one white candle. At least one black candle is placed to the left. One white candle is placed to the right. All right, in other words, you'll need at least one white candle and at least one black candle. And of course, matches or a cigarette lighter. Maybe you could just get away with just the one black candle and hold off on the white one, as long as you're just trying to get a ritual going. Black candles may be uncommon except around Halloween time, but they're not impossible to find. I suppose if you honestly can't get them, or if you're in a building where flames are not allowed due to legal fire codes, you could dim the lights in an attempt to achieve the same esoteric effect. Again, setting an environment is what we're mainly trying to do here. Next item, the bell. Now, this is an item that is admittedly harder to obtain. Even so, search enough stores, and you can probably find one that is loud and penetrating, as the book describes it should be. Antique stores are certainly worth checking first. Of course, you could just buy a nice bell from an online retailer. A good bell is certainly worth the investment, especially since you can probably use it as a substitute for the gong, too, if you need to. Many Satanists these days, including myself, use a Tibetan bell, which not only sounds great, but is easy to find in most New Age and occult shops or catalogs. Now, why do we have the bell in the first place? Well, the bell is just used to mark the start and end of the ritual, and I would say it's very important to establish those points of when your mind leaves and comes back to the real world, the mundane world. Otherwise, the purpose of having an intellectual decompression chamber is kind of lost. But since we're not concerned with perfection here, you could find other means of marking the beginning or end of the ritual to yourself, such as turning the ritual music on or off, giving your hands one clap together in the air, so on. Next item, the Chalice and the Elixir. Again, your first ceremony is not going to be perfect, so if you've got a favorite drinking vessel, or at the very least something classier than a Dixie cup, well, just fill it with your drink of choice. Problem solved. Next, the sword. The book says, for private rituals, if a sword cannot be obtained, a long knife, cane, or similar staff may be used. Again, simple enough. The sword is mainly used for calling forth the 4 princes of hell. You could even just extend your arm instead, maybe tracing a pentagram in the air with your finger at each cardinal point if you don't have the sword. But symbolically, I would say the sword is like an extension of the arm. You are psychologically reaching forward, extending your arm, penetrating. You're making a special emphasis by holding an item for this purpose. Next tool, the Phallus. Yeah, speaking of penetrating. The book says, necessary only in organized group rituals. Remember that we're only concerning ourselves right now with solitary rituals, so just to, keep things simple. So let's skip the Phallus altogether and just move on to the next item. Gong. Okay, again, this is a tool that the book says, quote, is necessary only in organized group rituals. So we can skip this too. Though, as mentioned earlier, if you already have a bell, then you could conceivably substitute the gong strikes for the bell. Likewise, if you don't have a bell, but you have a gong, you might be able to substitute the bell ringing with some light gong tapping. In fact, back in the 1990s, we did a group ritual for the satanic baptism, and the person who was going to bring the bell that day had car trouble and couldn't make it, so we substituted the gong. We did things impromptu, just as I described, and that worked well for our purposes. If you do eventually decide you want a gong anyway, well, major music stores, such as Guitar Center, musical instrument dealers will typically sell gongs in their percussion department. If they don't have any in stock, they can order one for you. And the final tool listed in the Satanic Bible, Parchment. The book says, plain paper may be substituted. Okay, again, how much simpler could it be? But even then, I would point out that parchment is typically only used for written requests, which is something you normally only find in group rituals. So, in this example, we could leave it out too. Personally, I like the aesthetic of parchment paper, the brownish gold paper, as it looks more, ancient, esoteric to me rather than just plain paper. If you go to an office supply store like SPeLLz, you can find 8.5 by 11 sheets of parchment paper. You can buy them by the box, or whatever standard size legal paper it's called outside of the U.S. Here it's called 8.5 by 11 inches. But what I do in any case is I use this kind of paper all the time. I type out all the rituals, all the ritual notes and passages and stuff like that I'm going to read during the ritual. What I do is I type them all out and I print them out on that parchment paper. Maybe using a font that's esoteric looking but still readable by candlelight. So that's another use of that. And that concludes the list. So, the lesson here, even if you go strictly by the book, for a solitary satanic ritual, some of the items can be found right in your own home. the clothing, the altar, the chalice and elixir, the paper. There's the Baphomet, which you can create yourself. You can leave out the Phallus and the Gong, since that's only for group ritual. And the remaining items, the sword, the bell, and the candles, can be substituted by other items if you really need to, but they're not wholly impossible to find either. In closing, and as stated earlier, if you're new to performing satanic ritual, your first ritual is not necessarily going to have all the tools, but the task of obtaining tools is neither as daunting nor constricting as some make it out to be. Build your collection of ritual tools piece by piece, using your own aesthetics and choice of variation. It will be a reflection of you, serving as a catalyst for your own ritualized desires. Raise some hell. And that concludes the second essay, and with that concludes this episode of Satansplain. Hope all of you have a wonderfully wicked Halloween. Hail Satan. You have been listening to Satansplain. If you have enjoyed this episode, please give it a like and subscribe where available. For more information on the show, visit Satansplain.com. And to learn more about Satanism itself, visit churchofsatan.com. This episode, copyright 2022, Magister Bill M.